In this video, we'll discuss the facial features on OJ Simpson that pointed to a propensity for anger and apathy, as well as some of the constitutional strength he carried. Enjoy. Hey everybody. So today we're going to be reading OJ Simpson. There was a recent Netflix documentary that was coming out about him and his life story. And I wanted to read him because I remember this trial, and he was on trial for the murder of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman. And I was in, I believe, 8th grade when this happened. But given he just passed, I wanted to read his face because there are some key elements in here that I think are worth discussing. So I like to say this too, as a caveat. You can't look at people's features and say, well, they have these features, therefore it equates to this. That's a lot like racial profiling or doing something where you lump a group of people together and say everyone is like this. You can't do that with facial features either. You can't say this one thing always means this. So that's the thing I want you to pay attention to as we talk about someone who was on trial for murder. And for what it's worth, I absolutely think he did it. I don't think he's innocent. I don't think he was innocent. So in any case, keep that in mind. If you are a first-time viewer, please go up to this little video up in the corner and watch the 5-minute crash course face reading video. You might blow that off and say, oh, I don't need to. Yeah, I'll just watch this. I really encourage you to pause this if you're a first-time viewer so you can understand how face reading works, what it is and what it isn't, and it's only 5 minutes. So, OJ Simpson. The first thing I want to talk about is my mom saw him in the late 70s or early 80s, and she said when she met him, one of the first things she noticed was how big his head was. Just big. It was like bigger than everyone else's in the room. In other interviews, people who have talked about him, they say the exact same thing. His head was abnormally large. So we want to think about this in the most basic context first and foremost. When we see big bone structure, and O.J. Simpson was very big, he had big hands, we're looking at Jing, constitutional strength, where there's a lot of genetic strength, essentially. But when we see also a very large face, we're also looking at the canvas for the face. If you think of the face as a picture, the canvas is very large. There's a lot of room. So O.J. Simpson had some pretty big life themes in terms of being a professional football player, having a lot of fame and notoriety, being in movies and whatnot. So this big head can play to, like a large head in face reading, a big head can mean like big life also. So that holds true. The other downside to that is we have to think when there's a lot of Jing and a lot of constitutional strength, with a lot of constitutional strength sometimes can come propensities for physicality and violence. Now, that is not always the case, but we're going to look at some of the facial features that he carried as well that I think, given that canvas, this is where it becomes a bit more relevant. So, first and foremost, he has some pretty strong wood dynamics. So if you look at some of these younger pictures too, when he's a bit leaner, you can see how long his face was. Big, long, kind of rectangular face. He's got a well-cut jaw. He's got a big chin. These are all big, bony structures, which mean, again, constitutional strength. This makes sense in terms of his football career and all of those things. Now, with that also, when we look at the wood element, okay, which regulates, the wood element regulates the liver and gallbladder. The liver digests anger, frustration, and also compassion. That's the way the organ systems work. They all digest a positive and negative emotion. So he's got this really big brow bone too. So this is another wood area. He's also got big bushy eyebrows. So when we see a surplus of wood, the propensity is we have to be mindful of our relationship to anger. That's always something we have to watch if we have those traits. Doesn't mean if you have these traits that you're going to be angry and violent, but it's something you have to pay attention to because anger is regulated by the liver. The liver gets hot, that anger can find an outlet into the world or causing harm to the self. So, big brow bones. Now, the other thing that leaps out to me when I look at O.J. Simpson was his shin. So again, in these younger pictures, there is sort of a very there's a cold apathy behind those eyes, and there's an intensity. Now, mind you, he played football, so there's going to be some aggressive tendencies with anything physical. But when you look at his face, you definitely see this kind of sleepy, sedate look, and that's a look in the shin you have to be mindful of. When people have that look where they look kind of sedate, like something is slightly turned off, you do need to be mindful. The propensity for toxic heart rhythms, okay, things like hate, jealousy, rage, apathy, cold calculation, that's what comes with that look. You can see it in drug dealers. You can see it in some of like the Mexican drug cartel pictures. You'll see these guys with this dull, apathetic look. You can see it in Chris Watts, which I did a face reading on him. I'll put that video up here. You can go check that out as well. And we'll see this look especially after someone has committed a crime. When someone has committed a violent act, oftentimes after, there is sort of a dull, apathetic, shell-shocked look to the face. And OJ has this look in his mugshot, first and foremost. When he got arrested for these murders, you can see that look in his face. Then you can also see it in some of these younger pictures. But as OJ got older, his face filled out, and he started to have consistently, I started to find pictures where he had a more consistent look of surprise on his face. Everything was kind of like this. And that look of surprise that we associate, or that we can see, can be associated with sort of like, it's a form of like PTSD or delayed shock. I've worked with some PTSD vets, and there's a look that they'll have where they kind of always look like they're on edge a little bit. There's this look of, they just look like they've seen something or done something that is still triggering to them. And as OJ got older, this look was more prominent on his face. I was just going through photos and it looked like he was more shocked, surprised, confused, and not all the time, obviously. And this is not a direct telltale sign that if someone has this look, that means they're in shock or that they've done something bad. But we want to think the countenance of the face, how the light comes out of the face. This is called the shen, or the spirit. And the spirit of someone's face is something we want to track, and it's far easier to track in person when we're talking to someone. So if you look at OJ Simpson in these, in interviews when he was talking about the murders and things, especially after he was, he got off, you can see that the shen in relation to what happened does not connect. And that's one of the biggest telltale signs. When he was talking about, the death of Nicole Simpson, there wasn't pain, there wasn't trauma behind it. He spoke very matter-of-factly about it. And this is one of the things where we see an incongruency with how the shen, or the spirit, actually experiences something. So when we experience trauma, we experience pain, we experience loss, there is a commensurate and proportional response that should be, quote unquote, appropriate, something that's fitting, something that feels heartfelt and connected. He doesn't have this look in those interviews. He looks like he's just talking about the weather for the most part. So the other thing I noticed too, as OJ got older, if you look at the sclera of his eyes, the white part of his eyes, okay, they started to get red. Now this happens to a lot of people, but when we see this, okay, the whites of the eye are regulated by the liver. So it can also relate to the heart as well. So we have to be mindful of that. But I think in terms of pathology, this is something you want to look at. When we see the sclera getting darker, turns yellow, or it gets a lot of bloodshot red, vasculature in the eye, what we're seeing is heat in the liver. The liver doesn't like heat. If the liver gets hot, we see outbursts of anger, we see outbursts of rage, outbursts of violence. If the sclera is also starting to get darker in general, this is sort of like a toxicity in the shen, or the spirit. This is where we're starting to see something is masking or bogging down the light of the eyes. Now, this can come from people who are very good people can have this trait. And it doesn't mean, again, you don't look at these features and think, oh, they have these eyes, therefore they're like OJ. That's not what I'm saying. You just have to take these metrics and you have to apply them. And moreover, I'm going to be honest, if I looked at OJ Simpson in his younger days, would I sit here and say, oh yeah, he's destined to commit murder? No, I don't have that capacity. I wouldn't be able to see that. But with face reading, the way you want to look at things, especially as we're learning, is you do want to take inventory of a person's face, the actions they live, and how their life terrain unfolds. And then you take those building blocks and you start connecting them, and you try to find patterns. You try to find some congruency, some continuity in rhythms, because face reading in the end is also about self-defense. It's not just about personality assessment and lifestyle expansion and how we optimize lifestyle. That's a big piece of it and why it's really important. But we also want to pay attention and use face reading in a practical sense. Self-defense is necessary in the world. We are not living in a perfect world. There are very real, problematic, dangerous things that happen. And so when I read people like this, these are sort of the things we want to track and pay attention to. But the thing that I notice, when I look at OJ Simpson, is that shen. There is something behind the shen that does not sit right. And I don't think it sat right for a lot of people, especially after he was arrested for these murders and whatnot. Now, if you look at his public persona, his natural face, and his inner persona, there's not a huge gap difference between any of them. Now, mind you, this is taken from his mugshot when he was arrested. There is a dull apathy amongst all of those faces. His inner persona is a bit wider, which means, according to face reading theory, his face and his inner personality was a bit more brutish, bullheaded, stubborn. When we see those wide features, we can see aggression, we can see a lot of things. But bigger and wider on one side of the face means that side of the personality is going to be more dominant. And the inner persona is beefier and thicker. The public persona is a bit more public relations oriented. Looks a little bit softer, but again, something we have to pay attention to. Now, OJ Simpson also has a full mouth. This is an earth feature. It relates to the senses. It relates to pleasure seeking. It relates to house and home and comfort and these kinds of things, which OJ definitely experienced. So, unfortunately, when you look at OJ Simpson's face, he had some quote unquote good, positive, lucky features. But in the end, the Shen is what operates everything. The Shen, or the spirit, or that deep consciousness, that infinite consciousness of a person, that is what runs the person. And that is going to animate the features, but you have to pay attention. You can have good luck features, strong, dominant features, of which he has, but underneath it, you have to read that immaterial energy coming out. A lot of people who talked to OJ and who were friends with him said they saw him flare. They saw him get very rageful, get very angry. And in general, that is something we have to pay attention to, and also something that looks like he was predisposed to in terms of elemental breakdown. Big, strong wood features, and that's something that we want to pay attention to. So, in any case, OJ recently died. There are a lot of people that are not unhappy about that, but I figured I would give him a read as a face to explore, to talk about Shen, talk about some wood energetics, and just a collective, overview of face reading and how it works. All right, y'all, take care.